Salam sejahtera, anda bersama saya Nala Huda dalam AWANI Global. Sejak 1992, Perhimpunan Agung Pertubuhan Bangsa-Bangsa Bersatu PBB setiap tahun meluluskan resolusi bagi mengakhiri sekatan perdagangan Amerika Syarikat ke atas Cuba. Dan sekali lagi, resolusi sama dibentangkan pada 23 Jun ini. Dan seluruh dunia akan mengikuti dan memerhati pentadbiran Presiden Joe Biden yang sebelum ini ketika berkempen telah berjanji akan kembali kepada dasar yang lebih longgar terhadap Cuba seperti mana yang dilaksanakan oleh Presiden Barack Obama. Jadi kita nak membincangkan pada jam ini apa yang boleh kita jangkakan daripada resolusi PBB tahun ini. Bagaimana agaknya hubungan antara Cuba dan Malaysia boleh bantu merangsangkan ekonomi dalam mengharungi tempoh kritikal ini. Dan baru saja tiba di Kuala Lumpur pada Mac lalu, Duta Besar Cuba Florentino Batista González bersedia bersama saya jam ini dalam AWANI Global. I'm honoured to be joined by Your Excellency Ambassador Florentino Batista González from the Embassy of Cuba in Kuala Lumpur. Thank you so much for joining me today. I want to dive in straight to the United Nations General Assembly, once again debating and voting on the resolution this June 23rd regarding the US sanctions on Cuba. What can we anticipate this year?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Naila, for giving me this opportunity to be here with you. This is not something new. This is a resolution that Cuba has been presenting since 1992 with the overwhelming support of the international community. This year is not going to be an exception. So in June 23rd, the Cuban resolution is going to be presented and debated at the United Nations General Assembly, and there's going to be a vote on that one. The US embargo towards Cuba is acknowledged as one of the long-standing and most coercive regime of sanctions ever imposed into any country. And it's a criminal policy on its core. It's a policy that looks to punish an entire population for having a sovereign decision, for making an own way of development, to have self-determination, and that's why it has been condemned worldwide for the last 27 years. Just to set a number, the last time the vote was 187 countries voting in favor of the Cuban resolution, only 3 against and 2 abstained. So this is probably one of the highest record votes in the United Nations, and we certainly expect this year not to be an exception. We have been witnessing many manifestations from friendly organizations, not only in the countries, but also in the United States, that they look forward and are changing in this policy. It was an attempt a few years back, but it's today worse than ever. And it puts a compound pressure on the Cuban population, on the Cuban economy during the COVID time, on the Cuban families and the relations between the Cuban that lives in the country and that lives abroad. It's, as I said again, it's a criminal policy at its core that looks to suffocate and to punish an entire population just for political reasons. It's wrong, and it's going to be condemned again by the international community, I'm sure.
You say you don't expect much difference this year. Now, we want to speak about an exception that has been demonstrated before. In 2016, under President Barack Obama's policy of engagement with Cuba, we witnessed the US and Israel abstaining from voting against the embargo, which then saw major changes to the country. Now, President Joe Biden has also promised that he would return to Obama's policy. What can we expect from this?
Well, I cannot speak for President Biden or the US authorities, of course. This is not my field or jurisdiction, but certainly you're right. In year 2016, the US government at that time acknowledged that this is a failed policy. That is a policy that has isolated United States against the community, that is against their own interests, and whatever is their final objective towards Cuba, this is a policy that is not serving their interests. This was acknowledged not by me, not by Cuba. It was acknowledged at that time by the US Permanent Representative for the United Nations. And in that sense, at that time, the Vice President of President Obama was precisely Joe Biden, who publicly has acknowledged that this is a policy that inflicts harm and pain on the Cuban population. on the everyday Cuban population and families. This is an open public statement. And during his campaign, his presidential campaign, he also said that once he was empowered, he would try to overturn all the policies that inflicts harm and did not serve the U.S. Interests. And he was talking precisely about, and he mentioned explicitly the Trump policies that it were in 4 years, 240 new economic sanctions towards Cuba. It's more than one per week. It shows a level of exaction and extremism that certainly put a great deal of harm into everyday Cuban economy. But once again, I could not say what they are going to do, but if you look at the record, if you look at what he has said in the past, certainly we expect that common sense will prevail and then the right thing will happen soon. And this is just correcting a historical wrongdoing, in my opinion.
International trade and economic growth is needed now more than ever after seeing how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected economies worldwide, with no exception to Cuba. So we want to know, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected Cuba, particularly to its economy?
Well, it's been severely affected, especially economically. Cuba is not an exception to what has happened in the planet. We have suffered a first, a second, and a third wave of infection, especially the third one after the minor opening we did in December 2019. I would say that we opened a little bit too fast our borders. The Cuban population abroad wanted to return to the country. And then 2021, we had really high levels of infection per capita. And especially the tourism industry, which is one of the most important engines of the Cuban economy, was totally paralyzed, and it has severely affected the daily operations of the Cuban economy. But on the other hand, we had a major advantage, which is our national healthcare system, which is community-based, and it's associated to a very powerful and developed biotech industry. From day one, our biotech industry began to develop our own solutions. One thing, if I may say, that we have both learned, both Malaysia and Cuba and the rest of the planet, is that sometimes you can have a lot of money, you can be very rich, but it doesn't mean that you have access to the medications and the vaccines when you need it for yourself and for your people. So taking from that and our medical advantages, we developed 5 vaccines. Some of them are on the very final stages of registration, but it's been widely available in Cuba, and our vaccination for the population has been moving at a fairly good pace at this moment. And if everything goes according to plan, and we don't see why not, by August, we would have around 8 million Cubans out of 11 million population fully vaccinated, which is a huge goal in terms of population and in terms of achieving herd immunity, and will put us in a very comfortable position to take whatever measure follows to that.
Looking at the vaccine developments in Cuba has been really interesting, and the results so far have been quite encouraging. Now, aside from the results, the clinical trials that have been going on at home, how have the vaccine diplomacy been going on? Because we see some other countries have also been procuring some of these vaccines from Cuba. And as you say, what we've both learned in terms of Cuba and Malaysia is the issue of vaccine equity. The distribution of vaccines around the world has been a huge issue. So how is Cuba deploying vaccine diplomacy right now?
Well, vaccine diplomacy, it's a very nice term, but it implies a certain level of intention, of diplomatic intention. And if I may say, what we've been doing is what we have been doing for more than 50 years in terms of healthcare and in terms of offering collaboration to all South countries and to whoever was in need. If I put an example, during the worst of the vaccine, the COVID crisis in Europe, Cuba sent medical brigades to Italy and to some other parts, even in Europe, to help support and to help the campaign to treat the infected people over there. So vaccines is only one of the approaches that we normally do. We have tell all our friends in the world when we were developing the vaccines, whoever wants to join and comes and play a role in this development, you are welcome. What we want is to help, that you have a solution the same way that we are trying to build one for ourselves. It's important to build capacity. It's important to have this kind of collaboration and exchange because the future, we know what's going to happen. And also we have learned that we might have another crisis of any kind in the next future. And what are we going to do? Rely on someone else to bring a vaccine? We totally believe that the best way is to build capacity in our countries. And for that, we need to collaborate. We have some intellectual property we can share. You have some resources that can put into play and help expedite the process and to help producing and doing the clinical trials. That's the way forward. If we all support each other, we can reach a better result in a shorter time. So vaccine diplomacy is nothing else than what we've been doing for a long time, not only with vaccines, with doctors, with education, sending our people to help wherever is needed. Vaccine is the latest example.
Now, you were able to witness two different experiences of the pandemic, having only just recently arrived in Malaysia. But I do understand that this is not a new place for you. You've been here before. So perhaps you can share what were your experiences like having been deployed to Malaysia before and now. I'm sure there are many differences. Malaysia is a totally different place now. So can you just share a little bit? How has it been like since arriving here now?
Well, I should say, first of all, that I'm a very lucky diplomat. Being posted to Malaysia twice is a luxury, and I'm very happy for that. I loved Malaysia the first time I was here more than 10 years ago, and certainly was very happy to come back. I believe there are obvious differences from the Malaysian facing today, but they remain core values and core things that makes Malaysia the beautiful country it has always been. Of course, arriving in pandemic, it has certain minuses. You need to go quarantine. There's a lot of places that are off limits. There are many things that you cannot normally do, but we understand totally, at least myself and my family, we totally understand that this is necessary. We need to prevent the COVID from spreading. We need to protect the people, and you can only do that by facing certain restrictions and by practicing some self-discipline. But having said that, Malaysia is beautiful as ever. This Kuala Lumpur city has changed enormously from the time I was here. Some places that I used to, even when I used to live in the Desa Pandan area here in Kuala Lumpur. The first time I go visit my former house, I'm looking at my GPS and I cannot believe I'm in the same place. So many things have changed that I can barely recognize. So it is a testimony to the hardworking Malaysian people. It's a testimony to how your nation has been able to build from one year to other. And this is something Malaysians should be all proud. And at the same time, you can see that Malaysian people, it remains friendly, beautiful, smiling, welcoming people. That's what makes Malaysia a great place to be, a great destination for everything. And sincerely, being having many more skyscrapers has not changed that. And that's a blessing.
Now, I want to shift gears a little bit and speak about, in general, not just your experience here, but in its entirety, Cuban-Malaysia diplomatic ties, which have been established for 46 years now. If you want to look a little bit at the history, with commercial ties first developed when Robert Kwok purchased sugar from Cuba in 1963. So, having seen that, our relations first developing with commercial ties, how would you describe these relations, and particularly looking at our trade and foreign investments? How has it been like over the years, and how has it developed to this day?
Well, that is probably an area that encompasses the most complex challenges for the relation. We have enjoyed an excellent relation with Malaysia from a diplomatic and political point of view since ever. Why? Because we share a common interest of protecting the national interests of both our countries. When you do that, you end up coinciding in many different aspects that even coming from different philosophical and ideological positions, when you try to protect your country and the values of your people, you end up in the same trenches sometimes with friends that you would never suspect. I believe it was the case in Malaysia from since ever, and that has only made a relation stronger during the years. And we can proudly say that we have enjoyed that type of relation with Malaysia. In terms of trade and investment, it has ups and downs. Right now, I would say it's not the best moment in terms of trade, but the Cuban economy itself has contracted severely during to the COVID pandemic crisis. So levels of imports from anywhere are very reduced. The impact of the US embargo has put serious limitations to the capacity of the Cuban economy, let's say, to buy things here in Malaysia that we cannot pay because we cannot use the monetary system and financial system to pay the Malaysian exporters. That is one simple example. And we are working towards that. This is our most important priority here in Malaysia these days, is to rebuild the relation, to make it possible to find ways to strengthen the bilateral trade. Last year, over a few tens of millions of dollars in Malaysian products arrived into Cuba, but through third parties, through different countries, not directly here from Malaysia. This is something we can change. This is something we should change for the benefit of both the Malaysian exporters and the Cuban market.
So perhaps with more ease of transaction and, perhaps we could see more relaxed financial transactions in the future, what perhaps could be areas of trade that Cuba and Malaysia can explore to further strengthen bilateral trade?
Well, we have interest in commodities, as always, here in Malaysia. Malaysia is a large producer of commodities, things that we normally import in Cuba for our industry. But I would say services and high-tech services is an area that we can really explore and benefit each other. Malaysia has been investing in education for the last 30 years. It has a very well-educated force, and has also been investing in industries like, let's say, the biotech industry itself here in Malaysia. The government has been putting a lot of money in the last 20 years for that. And there's an avenue. We have a lot of intellectual property. We have a lot of products that we have been able to identify, to take into a first stage, that we simply need a partner to go to the next level, someone who can actually do the rest of the process with us, to the rest of the trials, to do the commercialization, the regulatory process in order to register, and to take it globally. We have some experiences in the past. I mean, there was a meningitis vaccine that USM, the university, did work with the Cuban company in order to make it a halal variation of that vaccine for the Muslim market. And also there was some cancer vaccines that were jointly developed at the time. Those were only samples, but that can really be streamlined and can really be expanded to an entire different level.
Overall, what has the interest been like for Malaysian businesses to invest and do business in Cuba? I believe, as you said, there's a lot of interest in the medical and biotech sectors, but could there be perhaps new areas of interest in the coming few years? What's up and coming in Cuba right now?
Well, Cuba has been undergoing what we call an update of the economic model. And there's many new options that have been coming up in the last few years that didn't exist 10 years ago from the foreign investment point of view. Options that goes from the renewable energy production to tourism, to all kind of manufacturing services, to logistics and trade. Those are areas where Malaysia has a strong potential. because you have the experience, because you have the companies, and because you have the way and means to develop that. Cuba is strategically located in an area that is the crossroads from North America to South America. It's been like that forever. And it is expected that in the next 10 years, Cuba can recover that position. And if you look at the map, we're very close to the Panama Channel. The post-Panama vessels can go to Cuba. This is the main hub of trade that can be in the next few years. So Malaysian companies who look to produce and distribute in that part of the continent certainly do have an interest in settling down and to have a new way of establishing a relation that is much more beneficial than in the past. It's not only trading, it's now able to produce, to manufacture, and this is of great interest.
Vice versa, what about for Cuban businesses? What do you see some sectors of interest in Malaysia?
Well, we would always be interested in important things that are basic for the Cuban economy. Rubber, palm oil, things that we cannot produce, that we don't have it, and are plenty available here in Malaysia. But if I would say technology related aspects are of very much interest. Malaysia has been developing those areas in high technology that we can benefit from, especially in the communications and the areas that IT and related, everything that comes in relation with IT is an interesting area for us. But anything that deals with high tech is an interest for the Cuban companies.
Right, so you emphasize a little bit on more collaboration in services sector, and obviously when we're talking about services sector and more cooperation in our bilateral trade relations, I do want to shift gears a little bit and move towards people-to-people relations. What do you think moving forward in the post-pandemic world? How do you see Cuban and Malaysian people-to-people ties perhaps potentially seeing new areas of collaboration and strengthening these people-to-people ties in the post-pandemic era?
Well, post-pandemic era, I believe is going to be a challenge for everyone because everyone has so many accumulated desires of doing so many things that we don't know how we are going to do with all of that. But certainly, it's not an exception. I say, and many people is sometimes surprised. For example, Cuba and Malaysia enjoy a full visa exemption agreement. Malaysians do not need any kind of visa to go to Cuba. Cubans do not need any kind of visa to come to Malaysia. This is probably an exception in the area. Not many countries can enjoy that. And it's probably the base of the strong cultural exchanges that used to happen during the last 10 years. And I would believe they would be coming back again because this is an interest that is not fading away. It's just probably only been slowed down because of the pandemic, of the restrictions, but it's not fading away. This is the interest of Malaysians to travel to Cuba. The numbers were growing in the double digits at that time. And everyone wanted to, not everyone, of course, but I mean a large number of increasing people were trying to go down to Cuba and to enjoy the touristic facility just to watch and see how Cuba was like. And on the other side, Cubans who wanted to come to this part of the planet saw Malaysia as an interesting starting point, which was a nice place to be with a high level of cultural and education point of view. And it's the basis for a people-to-people exchange that has more to explore and to enjoy the cultural traditions and the heritage of both countries. And that, as I said, that never fades away. It only increases. It might be slowed down, but we certainly hope that when conditions are okay again, it will come back stronger than ever.
That is all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Florentino Batista González, speaking to me from the Embassy of Cuba in Kuala Lumpur. Thank you so much for your time and your insight today. Itu saja masih yang kita ada dalam AWANI Global bersama saya Nala Huda. Salam hormat.
The General Assembly is now voting on Draft Resolution A/75/L97.
Draft Resolution A/75/L97 is adopted.